Cattails on the Switch. I saw this on sale and it looked immediately intriguing to me, especially when I looked at the little trailer to the game, which described it as Stardew Valley with cats. Now the thing is, I'm sort of 50-50 on cats myself. I knew a very violent cat when I was a kid, and that kind of scarred me from cats for a very, very long time, but I also have a cat, and he's the best cat ever. But I do quite like Stardew Valley, and the idea of creating sort of a cat life sim survival type thing, it intrigued me quite a fair bit, and it was on sale, so I decided to pick it up. And, well, I enjoyed it, but it certainly does have its issues. Now, as I've said, I do have a cat, and he's the best cat ever, even if he is a bit of a smelly. So I decided, upon creating my cat, I decided to base him entirely off my own cat. I immediately regretted this decision as I was presented with the story, featuring my cat getting adopted, and then promptly abandoned in the woods for, I guess, doing his business on the carpet one too many times? I genuinely don't know. My cat's the best cat ever. I have no idea why he'd be abandoned in the woods. Also, don't abandon your cats in the woods! I feel like I shouldn't have to say this. It's just, that is horrible. Fortunately, your cat is then met with Coco, a cat who has been out here in the wild for a very, very long time, and Coco then proceeds to teach your cat all the basics. Stuff like hunting for food, foraging to get items to heal yourself, as well as to eat a little bit, basic combat, which is basically just mashing yourself into your opponent and hoping you win, giving other cats gifts, and then proceeds to teach you about how out here in the wild there are no less than 3 different clouters of cats, and you have to figure out which one to join. Except not really. This is a little bit bizarre. See, at the start, Coco basically tells you, okay, well, we're close to this one group of cats, let's just join them. And at that point, then you can actively say, well, no, what are the other options? Let's figure out what I want to do first. It feels like this structurally doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes more sense to just say, okay, well, there's 3 groups of cats out here. Why don't I go over which ones, then you can decide, as opposed to sort of gently, almost not quite forcing you, but very, very initially kind of saying, these are the guys you should probably join. And you don't want to join them because, oh my god, they are boring. You can join either the forest cats, which just sort of hang out in the meadow all day and are very, very bland, the mountain cats, which are basically just sort of more warlike, although all 3 groups are fairly warlike, or you can join the swamp cats and live in a mystic bog with a cat that has horns, and I'm pretty sure is somewhat demonic, as well as a cat wearing a plague doctor's mask. If there is one that it forces you kind of into to begin with, why is this awesome group not the default? Seriously, they are by far the most interesting of the 3. The other 2 are just sort of groups of cats. These ones are groups of cats that seem to also feature possibly some kind of demon and also a plague doctor. Why am I not being forced into joining these guys first? Now that said, you aren't forced into any of them, you can pick, but again, it just sort of nudges you towards one over the others, and it makes you go out of your way to say, I would like to hear about the other options, which comes across as a little bit structurally peculiar to me. Anyway, that is more or less the initial story. After that, the story is just survive and live your life in whichever colony you have chosen to join. Ostensibly, there is a little bit more about aiding Coco to sort of collect a bunch of random nonsense to appease a forest guardian spirit to bring back the balance to the forest. And for what it's worth, there is actually quite a reward for doing that, but it seems like something that gets kind of thrown by the wayside, and indeed, there isn't really much plot after the initial couple cutscenes and tutorial. After that, it's sort of up to you to figure out what to do, and while I think that it's a very good initial premise, it feels like there could just be more and it could be further developed as you go. You could make the argument certainly that it is about you developing your own story, and it is indeed your story, but even then, there's really not so much that you can do here in terms of development, and that leads me to a big problem I have with this game. Going back to one of my previous statements, I like Stardew Valley. One of my biggest issues is there is a lot there that just doesn't feel like it needs to be, or certainly is refined enough to have a purpose or even be justified to be in that game, and that goes double for this one, unfortunately. Every day you get up and you can proceed to a quest board that gives you sort of a daily quest, and it's randomized, stuff like going to fight in the cat war, which happens every day at 2 separate locations, visit X number of tiles on the map, go give gifts to the other cat clouders so that they're nicer to you, except not really. It's all sorts of different random stuff that I guess is supposed to sort of show you all the different mechanics and things you can do in this game. And doing that earns you points that you can then turn into different rewards. But there really aren't that many rewards that are all that useful. It's mostly just cosmetic stuff. Indeed, it's kind of bizarre that these quests give you different specialized quest points when this game features no less than, including that, 4 different types of economical currencies. You have your cat coins, which you can sell things for and buy things for. You have mole coins that you have to go digging in a mine to get minerals to sell for. You have special event ones that you can only use like once per month. And then you've got these mission ones. And really all they're used for is just buying different cosmetic skins and maybe pets. It's a little peculiar that this exists, but there's not really anything substantial you can do with any of them, and yet they've sort of set up 4 different microcosm economies, when one feels like it's not even well fleshed out, or even self-sustaining. Now, in addition to trying to gain points to buy cosmetics, there are not a ton of other things you can do in this game, honestly. You can walk around, you can hunt to get yourself some food so you don't starve to death, although death is very impermanent. It could just be the difficulty I'm playing on, certainly, but dying just means that your pockets get emptied, and that's about it. You can go to other clans and give them items so that they like you, and you can go visit their shops, but weirdly enough, being liked by other colonies doesn't stop them from attacking your colony. It doesn't really stop them from attacking you on the battlefield, although it does mean that some of the more passive scout people won't actively be aggressive towards you, so that is something, I'll give you that much. It also means that you can talk to their other NPCs, which comes across as a little bit strange because they need more dialogue. Like, they have different levels of friendship and stuff, and as you build up your friendship, they'll openly have slightly different things to say at every different iteration of friendship level, but they don't take into account various different circumstances under which you're talking to them. Frequently, I could have been talking to this one cat several times over the course of several days, and they'll still pretend they've never heard of me. Or likewise, you can, by building up your friendship with other colonies, abandon the one you started with, which, I mean, once you've got the swamp ones, I don't know why you'd want to swap, but there you go. You can go to their colony, and they'll act like they've known you forever. You can go back to your previous one, and they'll have no idea who you are. It seems a little bit peculiar that they didn't write in extra dialogue just to say, hey, I know you, you know? It feels like you're actively being ignored by the people that you have hung around with, which in my case took about 3 years. And yet they didn't know who I was. It was very, very odd, considering I was literally their next door neighbor for 3 years, and now they don't know who I am. Very strange. It does feel like they need to have more options in dialogue to actively acknowledge stuff. Not to mention just more than maybe 1 or 2 different dialogues depending on the overall friendship level of them. Because talking to every individual cat, once you've done it once per every friendship level, you've seen everything they're gonna say ever. And it's not like they have individual quests or a storyline or anything for building up their friendship or indeed any sort of relationship with anyone around them. They're all just sort of kind of robotic in that regard, which is a real shame. You can marry them. There is a cat marriage system as well as a offspring system, which is pretty interesting. I didn't explore this fully, but it's something that you can do. I did try and romance one particular cat, and, you know, it didn't feel like it really added much. Similar to a lot of other things in this game. Speaking of things that don't really add much combat, there isn't a lot of use to combat. I'm not going to lie. There are 2 daily battles with the other 2 cat colonies to expand your territory. I'll talk about that later. But combat really just devolves into smacking the RZ button to stop your character and swing your claws wildly, and hope you don't die. There's no real defensive options in terms of evasion or counterattacking or strategy to it. It's just sort of attack and hope you have more health and do more damage than they do. It's not great. There is a skill system which does allow you to employ different abilities, although you either have to sink a lot of experience because this is vaguely RPG-esque, or you can just outright buy some of them. And they don't really come across as ever really well utilized. I utilized a couple of them, but really the most use I ever got out of it was the initial one that speeds you up for a few seconds, and that was just to get around slightly faster. Theoretically, you could use it for hunting, but because hunting when you're running full speed is just attacking, your cat immediately stops, so whatever you're hunting is still moving full speed, and it's basically impossible to actually hit anything because you've stopped. Going back to issues and lack of nuance in combat. That said, it is extra combat options, which is kind of interesting. Expanding your colony's territory doesn't really mean much. As you gain influence over different areas by winning cat battles or using a specific item to increase your influence on specific map squares, your map square's color changes to what your colony's main color is, and that's about it. You could argue that the whole goal of this is to sort of conquer the whole map, but that's not really possible because there are specific areas, such as the Central Temple area or various home base areas, that are completely unconquerable. And having owned at least half the map, there didn't really seem to be much of a point to it. All it really does is dictate where the next cat conflict is going to be, and it happens every day, so really all expanding your own territory does is means you have to walk a little bit further to continue to fight people for not really much reason other than it's a steady source of experience and money, which, as we've established, doesn't really have a ton of value in this game outside of buying various different cosmetics and occasionally backpack upgrades. The only other use for combat is in a couple of trials during the sort of quote-unquote main quest of the game, as well as going into the mines where you might have to fight a couple of bats. Because other than cats, there are two other enemies. Bats that you find in the mine, and they are the only thing you find in the mine, and you have to fight them for 100 floors in both mines, and they don't get any more difficult or stronger, and they don't really get palette swaps or anything. They just come at you in slightly higher numbers. So that's a little bit boring. There's also one other different enemy you get to fight in the sort of main quest in a trial, but I'll keep that one a little bit of a secret. But they don't behave any different, and it's not like they require special tactics or anything to defeat, so they're just basically slightly different looking bats for as far as this game is concerned. The point is, enemies in this game, they are not varied, they don't employ different tactics, and there's no real nuance to fighting them. It's not interesting, and like a lot of things, it just feels a little bit underdeveloped. Not bad, mind you. There's definitely something here, and there's nothing about combat that really turned me off the game. It's just, it didn't feel all that interesting. It was just another thing I could do. Speaking of levels, going back and talking about levels for just a sec, if you gain enough experience, you can build up your cat's level. You can use your experience to buy special skills, which, like I said, aren't terribly well utilized, or passive upgrades to your cat's abilities. These are a bit scattershot in their usefulness. You have stuff like swimming, which could have a little bit of use 3 months out of the year when, you know, the water isn't frozen, because swimming in this game is really slow initially, and it's very easy to die if you go underwater. That said, if you upgrade this, you can get past any sort of river rather quickly, and it does make navigating the map actually relatively simple. So that's not bad. Combat is the only one that I would say is wholly good, and all this does is increase your overall damage output. It starts with like 1 damage per swipe, and it jumps up to 10 at the end. Nothing special, but it does mean fighting all those cats is a lot easier, as well as the bats, and having a higher damage output means you get more experience and money along the way, so it just makes sense. The other two are building your hunting ability, which didn't really seem to do all that much. I think what it does is let you sneak up and jump from slightly further away to actually catch animals, and it means that your like lunge attack is slightly more accurate, which is good because starting out it's wildly inaccurate. But other than that, it doesn't do a whole lot. Gives you a little bit of an identifier as to where creatures are on the map relative to you with a little arrow, but that's about it. Foraging is passively kind of useful for survivability, but that's about it. All it does is increase the overall effectiveness of various herbs you can use to heal yourself. And that's another thing about this. All these level ups seem very underwhelming. Gaining the experience for them can take quite a long time, especially during the later levels, and there's no way to really increase your experience gain. Everything just gives you like 2 experience from finding an item to killing an enemy, and there isn't really a lot to it. I think if I were in charge of this system, I would have added more subtle perks. There is a system like this in place, but you don't see it too often. Really, the only perks I saw were that little arrow that appears above your head when you've got your hunting skill a little bit better, and the only actual useful one, which was when you get your foraging up high enough, you can see all the berries and stuff on your map, which once again means traversal is a little bit easier. I would have every 2 or 3 levels had more of a subtle upgrade that would have likely increased your probability of finding an item, such as like a healing item for foraging or something, or maybe creating more abilities like being able to create bait for other animals to hunt better, or just some better attacks and maybe like a dodge for combat. It does feel like this perk system has, like everything else in this game, a good idea behind it, but it's just not refined enough, and it's not well polished or explored as in depth as it really should be to be something that's overly enjoyable. It's not bad, but it's just not great. Also, I should probably mention this by now. I've mentioned traversal a couple times, so I would be remiss not to. You might have noticed me looking at the map an awful lot in this game. Yeah, that is a huge problem in this game, is this map is decently sized, but each individual area on the map lacks any sort of prominent defining landmarks. It's really unbelievably easy to get lost in this game, and even though I've spent probably 20-30 hours playing this game, I still get lost all the time, and it really makes me regret not naming my cat Magellan. Missed opportunity, damn it. I do appreciate that there are sectioned off areas on the map, such as the southeastern quadrant being more of a swamp area, the northeastern being more mountainous, and the southwestern being more of a beach. But overall, each individual map tile is largely just interchangeable with the next, and that makes navigation a lot more confusing than it ever needs be. This game also features a season system, which is utilized decently enough, I suppose. Lots of different flora show up in different times of the year, which, seeing as a lot of this needs to be collected in order to do the main quest, means you might have to go through a couple of years, which kind of sucks, but what can you do? You can find stuff like poisonous mushrooms during the winter and fall months, whereas you can find helpful herbs and berries during the warmer months. And during the winter, you don't need to swim because all the water is frozen, except this waterfall. I think that's an animation error. But at least, if you didn't invest in swimming, you can get around a little bit faster, plus you have this adorable sliding animation. I love this animation. In addition to that, there's not a ton of use of the actual calendar. At the end of every season, which is 10 days, there is a festival, which is always one event done 3 times, and it's always the exact same event, and none of them are terribly interesting. It's usually just button mashing and then hope you win. Like this snowball fight, it's just stand in one place, button mash, and the enemy will never defeat you. While all the festivals are different, they don't get much better than this, and completing each festival just gives you more of a specific festival currency that you can use to buy more cosmetics. Yeah, it feels like the rewards need to be a lot more significant, but that's a running theme with this game. Overall, gameplay-wise, Cattails feels, I don't want to say lackluster, because there's very clearly good ideas here. It feels unrefined, is what it is. It needs more polish, and it needs a lot more of really everything it's doing. It's not doing anything particularly wrong, except for maybe the map, but it needs a lot more refinements, and it just needs more content in pretty much all regards. I mean, you can get up in the morning, you can go do your quest for the day, you get coins, great. But at the end of the day, all that does is get you more cosmetics, and everything just seems to lead back to cosmetics. Also, for some reason, the cosmetic page has a code redeeming feature, which I have no idea what this is about. I don't know what this feature is, but there's just a lot about this game that feels like it just needs more. And this is an indie developed title, so I imagine that budget and time and all sorts of other constraints are the issue to this. And that's a shame. There is a lot of good here, but it needs a lot more refinement, and it certainly needs a hell of a lot more content. The overall presentation of Cattails is excellent. I think it looks great. I love the pixel art style. It does look very much like Stardew Valley, as the trailer to this game proclaimed. And honestly, I think everything just looks very, very good. Audio-wise, it is tremendous. I love the soundtrack to this game. It's very, very relaxing, very, very chill, and nothing feels out of place. And when it's raining, all soundtrack kind of dies, similarly to Harvest Moon, which means you're kind of just stuck with the sound effects. I ran into an issue with this when I decided to record audio with this, because I turned off all sound effects, and that made this game very, very quiet for a long time. That's not the best. There could be a little bit more ambient sound, I think, with this game. But that said, the soundtrack is tremendous and the presentation is great. Now, if you want a copy of Cattails on the Switch, well, you can only really get it digitally. It's also available on Steam for about $17, but it seems to be on sale at a decent rate, and I think this game is a lot of fun. I'm really struggling to figure out what I want to say about this, because this game does have a lot of issues. It feels lacking in in a lot of regards. And yet, there is a lot about this game I find charming and fun and relaxing and great. I think the biggest thing about this game is it is a indie game, and that means that there was, of course, budget, time, and, you know, all sorts of other restrictions applied to this, and really all I want to see with this game is see it improved on and developed further. I would love to see the developer go on to make basically this game, but more polished, more in-depth, and just more content, because really a lot of this ends up going back to just collecting skins and stuff, and once you have your cat looking kind of like what you want, that's about it. There is one major reward in this game, and it's for clearing out the main quest, and I gotta say, that's pretty cool. I'm not gonna talk about what it is, but I will say that the main prize of the quest is really, really cool. But like everything, it feels sort of inconsequential and half-baked. There needs to be a lot more of greater significance. There needs to be better thought-out upgrades. There needs to be more collectibles that make sense. There needs to be some sensible use of its actual economy and not like 4 separate economies that don't interact with each other that all come down to cosmetics. I still have no idea what this cosmetics code thing is. That's gonna bother me, I think. But Cattails is a very fun game. I enjoyed my time with it, and I think it was a great addition to the Switch. And when my greatest issue with it, outside of course, the map, is just I want more and I want to see it better done, I think that's a good sign, you know? I liked my time with this, and I hope that they continue to refine this. I hope that there are updates that make this a little bit more in-depth and give you more stuff to do, but it is a fun game, and if you see this on sale, I suggest you grab it because cats. And the internet loves cats. Look at this cat. He's the best cat.